I'm live. Oh my goodness. How's it going, everybody? I'm super stoked to be here. Let's do our little time countdown. 30 minutes to the show and we'll get Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Brad Klontz. I am a financial psychologist. Turns out it's a pretty good thing to be right now in the midst of what's happening in the markets. A lot of people are stressed. I am a financial planner also, so I have clients, and my clients are stressed. Absolutely. And so are a lot of financial planners out there. And we've done studies on financial planners in the midst of the last Great Recession, where the stock market went crazy, took a bunch of losses. And what we found is that people were pretty stressed. 90% of the financial planners in our study back in 2009 reported moderate to severe symptoms of post-traumatic stress. They had trouble eating. They had trouble sleeping. They were worried. Of course, they were worried. And it seems like we are repeating that experience for many clients and many planners right now. So this is something that's been happening for a while here. What's up, Beth? Good to see you. You're not stressed. I love it. So I'm just checking in on you guys. Like, how stressed are you? Are you stressed about the stock market? Let me know in the comments. You can put a 0 if you're not stressed at all. You can say 1 if you're somewhat stressed. And I just want to say this. I think it's pretty normal to be stressed. It's pretty normal to feel anxious about what's happening. This is just how we're wired. We are wired biologically and psychologically to be stressed out when we see the market either moving up and we feel like we might be missing out, or when the market's crashing, we can feel panicked, not knowing what to do. And part of this is our tribal prehistoric brain that is really hell-bent on survival. And so this is how we've been wired. This is how we have thrived and survived over all of our time here on Earth. It's only been in modern history that our brains don't have to act this way. But basically, all of our ancestors who weren't anxious or weren't excited when they saw the rest of the herd running in one direction, all of our ancestors who just stood right in place when the rest of the village fled, well, they all didn't pass on their genes. So they either got picked off by a predator or by some warring tribe. It is built into our DNA to be very, very concerned about what everybody else is doing and to run with the herd. And so this is a live conversation here. And so I'll be reading through. Hey, Seth, what's up? Beth's in the house. Princess, great to see you here. Josh, thanks for joining. I'm going to be sharing with you 7 tips to avoid financial ruin in a crisis. Now, this is a presentation that I started to work on in the midst of COVID. It's a presentation that I think I started to work on for me as an individual, understanding my own psychology around market crashes back in the tech bubble. Certainly back in 2008, 2009, professionals were stressed. The average person was very stressed. And we're just wired to do the wrong things. This is the reason why I'm on here chatting with you right now. We are wired to do the wrong things when it comes to money. We are wired to destroy ourselves. So I'm going to give you 7 tips to avoid financial ruin in a crisis. So I'll mention this too, that when you look at the historic returns of the stock market over the last 100 years, what you're going to find is that the stock market has returned on average about 10% annualized every year for the last 100 years. Now, when you look at the average investor, they're pulling down about 2% or 3%. Now, so wrap your head around that. So the average person, stock market, 10% on average person is like 8% less than the stock market. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that the average investor is doing way worse than the market itself? It's our psychology. And basically what people are doing is they're selling when they should be buying. They're buying when they should be selling. They're just doing absolutely all the wrong things when it comes to money. This is just how we're wired to do it. So I'm here to chat with you, talk with you, because I want you to avoid financial ruin. Of course, I want to avoid it myself. So let's get into the 7 tips right now. So the first tip I have for you is, and this is going to sound fairly trite, but it's really, really important, especially in times like now where we're really stressed around money. And so tip number 1 is to put some time between your impulse to do something. And we're talking specifically about investing, whether it's, going all in, going all out of the market. Put some time between that impulse and your action, because you are wired to respond very impulsively. Our brain is wired to survive. It is our herd instinct. Okay. When the rest of the herd is running in one direction, we want to follow. When we become emotionally flooded or emotionally charged, we become rationally challenged. And basically what's happening is it's our stress response. Our stress response was designed to help us survive in life-threatening situations. Now, unfortunately, in modern society, this fight, flight, freeze response can get triggered when all sorts of things are happening that aren't life-threatening. So, for example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. Now, you're safe. Maybe your heart, fluttered a bit there. You were curious whether you would be safe or not, but you are. But what will happen is your brain will continue to go forward as if it was a life-threatening event. Sometimes people get angry. Sometimes there's road rage involved in this. Sometimes that can leave us shaking for a while. Like, we're really concerned about that, when our life really wasn't threatened in that moment. It's just our fight, flight, freeze response. And if you go a little bit deeper on the psychology of this, not to go off on a tangent, but when somebody's cutting you off in traffic, part of what gets triggered for you is this sense that that person is not respecting me. That person doesn't see me as important. And that is an existential threat to that cave person brain, because in a tribe of 100 to 150 people, if you weren't seen as important, if you weren't seen as being valuable, your life was threatened. And so this is why we can be very emotionally triggered by things that, from the outside perspective, this is not life-threatening. As a matter of fact, it was maybe even slightly inconveniencing, but we respond as if it's a life or death situation. And so when it comes to investing, the flight response would be, I got to sell. I got to get out of the market. And there's many reasons for this. One of them has to do with a narrow frame of reference, which we're going to talk about in a bit. But basically, we are wired to see things in the short term too. This is the desire to survive in the midst of threat. When we see people moving in one direction, it's really tough to stay still. This goes against our wiring. We're not wired to do it. And the only way to really get on top of this animal brain, this emotional brain that's going haywire when we're stressed, is to calm it down. And so one of the ways to calm it down is to turn off the news around the stock market, to take some deep breaths. This is one of the roles that financial planners can play in their clients' lives that's really important. Sometimes we are a stopgap between somebody's impulse to take action and not doing it, or us talking them down, or bringing in a broader perspective. And so anything you can do to put some time between your impulse, whether, again, it's excitement or whether it's fear, extremely powerful in terms of getting a handle on your financial life, and in terms of becoming a good investor, and in terms of not destroying yourself when it comes to investing. I've gotten calls today, and I know many advisors have, where people are very concerned. And as an advisor, I never try to tell people not to be concerned, because the bottom line is we don't know what is going to happen in the future. We don't know if this stock market decline is going to be something that lasts for a while, or whether there's a quick recovery. And part of that not knowing, though, is one of the reasons why the best advice that you will get from most financial planners is to take some deep breaths, is to remind you and remind ourselves of what is the broader goal for investing here. What was our broader vision? And the appropriate approach to investing, according to me, this is my opinion, and many financial advisors would agree, is that long-term vision around investing. If you have approached investing with a get-rich-quick sort of impulse or mindset, and if you come from a lower income environment, this is actually fairly normal. I mean, this is where I came from. And when I first started to invest, I thought, oh, well, this is how people get rich, right? They go invest and they make the right investments, and then 5 years from now, they're a millionaire. And, if you've had any experience in the markets, or you've evolved over time, if you had that mindset like I did, just learning how people actually do become wealthy, that's really not how wealthy people approach investing. If you're new to investing, just understanding this, that the wealthy mindset around investing is I'm going to work. I'm going to perhaps try to increase my income by having more skills, by having more education, by learning about business, whatever route it is that you want to take. So I'm going to increase my ability to make money. And then what I'm going to do, and this is really the key to wealth building, is I'm going to save and invest as much money as possible. So be looking at a percentage of income that you want to save and invest. That's really the key. And so this is a mindset that I talk a lot to people about on social media, particularly TikTok. I've got live streaming to TikTok right now because this is that mindset. I think that many of us, if you grew up lower income, lower middle class, the mindset, you got to really change your mindset. You have to understand how wealthy people think, how most people become wealthy, because when you come from those lower socioeconomic environments, you don't have necessarily a mentor who teaches you about how to become wealthy, who teaches you the approach to making money in the stock market, etc. So tip number one to avoid financial ruin in the midst of a financial crisis or turbulent market events is to basically not do anything. Put some time between your impulse to take action in your portfolio and you're pulling the trigger on that. And one of the best things you can do, quite frankly, is to take some deep breaths, relax, and then call your financial advisor or call a friend, dial a friend, have somebody, call your therapist, call somebody so you can actually get, remind yourself, why am I investing? What are my long-term goals? Why am I doing this to begin with? And if it was to make quick money, you did it for the wrong reasons. So there could be an opportunity here for you to examine your approach to investing, and that's okay. If you got to take a hit along the way to learn how to be a better investor, welcome to the club. I got interested in financial psychology after losing money day trading back in 1999 and 2000. This is how I thought people got rich, before I read all the studies on day trading. So if you've made mistakes in terms of the market, don't feel bad about it. We're wired to do it all wrong. You're not alone. This is part of the process and journey, I believe, to developing a good psychology around financial planning, a psychology around wealth. So we all make mistakes. Welcome to the club. All right. So the key, though, is not to make those mistakes worse. And if I'm catching you in the right time, maybe you can actually avoid making some of those mistakes. Let's talk about tip number two. Tip number two, avoid catastrophic thinking. Avoid catastrophic thinking. Now, what do I mean by that? These are the types of thoughts that tend to emerge in the middle of a market crash or a market correction. Like we don't know what it is. One of the terrible pieces of advice I see on TikTok all the time, all my friends on TikTok, are things like, buy the dip, buy the dip. Now, I understand the philosophy, right? So what people are trying to suggest is that when the market goes down, that's when you should be buying, right? Buy low, buy low. But the problem is there's some market timing built into that because you don't know whether it's a dip or a crash until it's over, right? And what's so fascinating is a lot of people new to investing, a lot of millennials, a lot of Gen Zs, they had never really experienced a market correction. And so that whole meme of stonks always go up, the people really embodied this. And some studies have shown that millennials, for example, believe that they are much better at investing than professionals at a degree that has never been seen before in history. So when you look at Gen X, when you look at baby boomers, they have some more modesty around their ability to predict the market, right? Well, we've had an entire generation of people who've only seen the stock market go up until recently. So this is probably really good for you if you're new to investing to experience this part of the market. But catastrophic thinking will make you crazy and it'll set you up to do all the wrong things around money. So these are the types of catastrophic thoughts that are fairly common in the midst of a market crash. And they go like this: the markets may never recover. I'm going to lose all my money. This time it's different, but this time the market may never recover. And I just want to remind you, if you are my generation, I'm a Gen Xer, if you've lived through some of those market corrections, I just want you to think back to that period of time, because chances are you had a lot of these thoughts. You thought, this time it's different, in terms of the market either going up or down, or things aren't the same as they've always been. Things are totally different now. Well, it's not true, because basically human beings are the same and markets are just a bunch of human beings. And so the whole idea of market bubbles and crashes, it's been around since forever. It'll always be around because human beings are wired to just do it all wrong. So think back to what you did in 2000, what you did in 2008, 2009, and how you feel about it. Did it help? I know people, and you may know people who went to cash in 2000. I know people who went to cash in 2009, right after the market crashed, by the way. So the absolute wrong time to do it, who stayed out of the market for years. I know even people who stayed out for decades, right? And so then what happens is you have a very massive surge in prices and appreciation in the stock market. We have people on the sideline who were traumatized from losing money. They sold when they shouldn't have sold. They sold at the absolute bottom. And how do you know when to jump back in, right? There's no formula for jumping back in. And this is why we see the average investor underperforming the stock market like dramatically, because we're wired to do it all wrong. They've done some studies where people who are dead actually have better performance in the stock market than all of us, all of you expert traders out there who think you can beat the market, right? So you're better off doing nothing, quite frankly, according to the research. So you have to avoid this catastrophic thinking. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where the market's going to go tomorrow. We don't know where it's going to go 6 months from now, 5 years from now, whatever. But the longer you've been in the market, the more you've had these types of experiences, and the more you've had the experience of coming out on the other side, and you can perhaps temper some of those impulses you have to do the absolute wrong things, because that's what we're wired to do. All right, let's move on to tip number 3. And by the way, we have 7 tips to avoid financial ruin in a financial crisis. If we're just meeting for the first time, my name is Dr. Brad Klontz. I'm a financial psychologist. I study psychology and money. I study the mindsets of the wealthy versus middle class versus lower income. I study the psychology of financial planning and how financial planners can be more effective in working with their clients. I've got this book coming out next week that's written for financial planners and coaches and professionals, talking about how we can make sense of client psychology, how we can use what we know about client psychology to help people improve their financial lives. So tip number 3 is to harness your cave person brain. Harness your cave person brain. And specifically with regard to the markets, I want to talk about mental accounting. Mental accounting is one of the behavioral biases and cognitive biases that come from behavioral finance. And it talks about our natural tendency to put things into buckets so that we can make sense of them. This helps us think quickly, helps us stay agile in the moment. Again, typically to help save our lives. It's not very helpful when it comes to money. And let's talk a little bit more about how we can harness this concept of mental accounting. So the first thing I want to say is that when you see the news related to the stock market, you will see things like the Dow Jones is down, 5%, 7%. The S&P 500 is down 5%, 7%. And you'll panic, right? It's down for the year 15%. All right. Well, the important thing to know is that for most financial planning clients, most investors who approach investing with a disciplined, diversified approach, which is what most financial planners would advise, that you have some diversification across asset classes. For most people who are investing who have that approach, you don't have all your money in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. You don't have all your money in the S&P 500. So when you see those numbers thrown up in the news, you're having a visceral response that does not correspond with your actual investment portfolio. So this is where mental accounting comes in. So this is an actual graph of an account during the right during COVID. So I can't really see the numbers here, but basically, as I recall, this person had a mental bucket of equities and a mental bucket of fixed income or bonds. And so rather than looking at the one portfolio as a whole, what we did is we separated these into 2 mental buckets. And you can see that in this circumstance, the equity side was down about 20%. And so, yeah, this was leading to panic, right? Oh my goodness. The bond side was down about 3 or 4%. Now, what's so important about this is that for many of our older clients or people who are older and they're investing, they're the ones who are most concerned about at least potentially what's happening in the market, because they're going to need to start drawing from their portfolio to fund their lives, right? Well, what typically happens is you'll find people who are in that older age range, they have 50% of their money in fixed income, or 40%, or maybe even 70%. And so at least half or the bulk of their money might be in a fixed income bucket. And if you look at that bucket and think about withdrawal, like in some cases, you can spend the next 10, 15 years withdrawing from that to fund your life without having to dip into the equity bucket. So in this sense, you can be an older investor, and you might think, oh, I need to all be in bonds. Well, you can have an equity exposure, but you might not need to even draw from that equity exposure for years. So you're going to have years to allow that equity part of your portfolio to increase, to recover, to rebound. So rather than looking at the news and seeing that the S&P 500 is doing this or that, it can be really helpful to actually look at what you have in your portfolio, because part of that news may affect part of your equity bucket, but might have nothing to do with your fixed income bucket. So just keeping that in perspective. This is one of those ways we can harness that cave person brain to help us calm down and not do anything stupid. That's the whole point. Okay, here comes tip number 4, expanding your frame of reference. What happens when we are stressed around money is that our focus becomes very narrow. It becomes very narrow. And this makes sense because our approach to the market is really driven by our cave person brain, our tribal brain, our ancient brain, our animal brain. And that brain is only interested in survival. I mean, that's it, right? If I can get to tomorrow, I can pass on my genes. And so it's very much focused on today and surviving today. And so in moments of stress, our focus gets more and more narrow. It's only in moments of relaxation, meditation, that our mind can expand, right? And we can see all the possibilities of the universe. And we can think through all the possible scenarios, and we can ponder, and we can spend time thinking about, oh, if I did this, then that would happen. And what's meaning in life for me? And what's going to bring me ultimate joy? Okay. So what a fun exercise. That exercise, though, can only happen when you're safe, right? It can't happen in an environment where you're emotionally triggered and you're focused on survival, because the daydreamers in moments of stress, for human beings historically, they all got picked off by the saber-toothed tiger, right? So everyone else is focused on immediate survival. The daydreamers are just thinking, about, oh, what am I going to do with my life? They're getting picked off by a predator, right? In moments of stress. So just understanding this, that it is absolutely normal. And this is a theme that I keep hitting. It's absolutely normal for us to do the wrong thing constantly when it comes to our money. And when we're stressed, it's very, very normal for us to get a narrow frame of reference. And when you have a narrow frame of reference, critical to your survival, if you're being chased by a dog drooling with rabies, right? And it's chasing you and it's going to bite you, your frame of reference needs to be extremely narrow. It needs to focus on pumping your arms and legs as fast as possible. You need to be focusing on where you're running. That is a narrow frame of reference. You can't be thinking about the future in that moment. So what happens when we're stressed around the market is that our focus becomes very narrow. And so our goal is to then expand that frame of reference. So this is how you do it, okay? So your frame is how you are making sense of a situation, right? So it's the criteria you use to make judgments, measurements in certain situation. So my first question to you is, are you a short-term investor? Are you a short-term investor? And I hope your answer is no, because if you are a short-term investor, I would have encouraged you not to invest in the stock market at all if it's short-term, because what we know historically is that sometimes the stock market crashes. Sometimes it goes down 20%, 30%, 40%. Sometimes it goes down 50%. I know this is hard to grasp if you're new to investing and you've only seen 20 years of a bull market, but sometimes the market takes a massive hit during a short period of time. So most investors who are skilled, who are good at it, who've been doing it for a while, most financial planners know this obviously also, that you need a long-term view when it comes to investing, because in the short term, you're going to experience volatility. You're going to experience market events that can't be predicted. Black swan events, if you will. And what I've been around long enough to see that these things are always just going to happen, right? It's just when's the next one. And we think it's really tough now, but think about what it must have been like for people growing up, during World War II. I mean, like, you think it's bad right now, global supply chain problems. Imagine what it must have felt like when the entire world is going to war and you don't know who's going to win. You don't know who's going to lose. You're not sure. It's a daily fight for survival in many parts of the world. So things have been way worse in the past, right? And God forbid we ever get there again. But that short-term frame of reference is terrible for your investing. It's really critical for your survival, terrible for your investing. So if you are a long-term investor, which hopefully everybody is, short-term fluctuations are actually irrelevant. They're irrelevant to your entire experience around investing. But your frame of reference will make this experience that we're having right now in the market, it's either going to feel like falling off a cliff or it's going to feel like hitting a pothole along your drive. So which one is it? If you're a short-term investor, this is going to feel, and it should feel, like you're falling off a cliff. If you're a long-term investor, this should feel like a pothole. Okay, even though we want to recognize that the fear is real, or we can't predict the future, I just want to share with you that yes, absolutely. So fear is normal. It's very normal to have that level of fear. But is it a pothole? Is it a cliff? So let me give you a couple examples here. All right, so this is a chart of what happened during the midst of COVID, where we saw the market, moving along, and then boom, look at that drop over that period of a month or two there. Wow, that does look like it's falling off the cliff, doesn't it? And if I am focused on that 1 month, that 2 month, that 3 month chart, or that weekly chart, or that daily chart, oh my goodness, that is a roller coaster right there. That is terrifying. What a terrifying drop. And as I'm focused on that, I can feel my stomach lurch. Oh my goodness, is this ever going to recover? Well, that is a narrow frame of reference. That's a short frame of reference. If we expand that frame of reference out and we look at that Dow Jones Industrial Average chart for is this the S&P 500? And we see it now. It's like, well, if you look up over there, it's more of a pothole, isn't it? In that longer frame of reference. And so a fabulous tip here, so that you don't destroy your financial life in the midst of this crisis, is to think about this as a long-term approach. So this is a long-term approach to creating wealth, creating generational wealth. And so why are you so concerned about the short term? This is not the chart you should be focusing on if you are a long-term investor. It's irrelevant to long-term investing. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments. This is the more appropriate frame of reference if you are an actual investor. If you're a trader and you're trying to beat the market and you have that sort of like poor mindset, to be honest, I'm just going to be frank with you because I love you. Of course you're going to be feeling anxious about it. That's not how most people approach investing, and that's not how I think you should approach investing. You should approach it with a long-term view. Okay, let's move on to tip number 5, and we have 7 of these. Try the worst case scenario exercise. The worst case scenario exercise. Now, this is a very powerful psychological intervention. And if you're watching this right now, I'd encourage you to try this out. Okay, it's a mental exercise. The worst case scenario exercise. By the way, this is a picture during the Great Depression. Oh my goodness, what a terrible way to experience life. And if you have anyone who's lived through that, or perhaps you've lived through a mini Great Depression in your own life, coming up, being raised poor, that kind of thing, you know what it feels like, right? To not have enough to eat, to worry about shelter, to worry about feeding your children, clothing your children. The worst case exercise will help you calm that emotional brain. And so I want to encourage you to use this with caution. Okay. So I wouldn't necessarily be, sharing this with a client who's acutely stressing out about money, because this is a form of reflection, right? So you have to basically sit with people. If you're a financial planner out there, you have to sit with people's anxiety. You have to normalize it. You can't pretend like, that you're not anxious to a degree. This is a normal response, right? The key too is to recognize this normal human response, the stress response, so that you can overcome it. If you deny it, you're not only going to be disingenuous to your clients, you're going to set yourself up to being more vulnerable to making mistakes yourself. So just acknowledging that this is real, right? Of course you're stressed. This is a form of exposure therapy. And what we want to do is run through the worst possible case scenario. So the stock market's crashing, or it's going down, or whatever word you want to use. There's a correction. It's really important to understand that if you live in the United States and you're middle class or above, your financial situation isn't going to kill you. So your brain feels like it's life threatening, but it's actually not going to kill you. You're going to be okay, right? You're going to survive. Your financial stress could kill you, like quite bluntly. Financial stress is a leading mortality risk factor. Studies have shown it's akin to like heart disease and high blood pressure and diabetes. I mean, it can kill you. Financial stress can kill you. And unfortunately, it hurts a lot of people. But the question is, like, how stressed should you be? So let's say that you have a disciplined approach to investing, you got a solid financial plan, you have good diversification. You know that market fluctuations are just part of the deal. It's just normal, okay? So this is the worst case scenario exercise. What you do is, instead of trying to push all this away, what's up, Sinbad? Welcome to the chat. This is what you do. You ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario? So what is the worst case scenario? I'm going to ask you this right now. So you're investing in the stock market. What's the worst case scenario? What do you see it being? Let me know in the comments. What is the worst case scenario, or things you've heard other people say? What is the worst case scenario? The market gets really bad. Your holdings go down 50%. You lose your job. You get fired from your job. Then what would happen? Well, if I got fired from my job, then I wouldn't be able to pay my rent or mortgage, which would be a terrible emotional experience, by the way. But then what would happen? Well, if I lost my job and I couldn't pay my mortgage, then, maybe 6 months from now or a year from now, I'd have some foreclosure going on, or maybe I would get evicted from my house. Okay. Well, then what would happen? Well, after a period of feeling depressed, I don't know, what would happen in your life? What would you do? And when my wife and I have done this exercise, we landed on, well, we would have to ask a friend or a relative if we could move in with them. And then I started to think it through, and it's like, I've got 2 young kids, and let me just be blunt with you. What they would like more than anything is to move in with grandma and grandpa for a year or two. It would be terrible for me and my wife, and I would feel like a total failure. But we would survive. We would survive. And I'm seeing in the comments too, worst case scenario would be ruin relationships. And think that through. Why would it ruin your relationships? And would some of those relationships, why would it ruin them? And if are they more surface level? And I'm just throwing this out there, just thinking it through. Because sometimes going through major financial stress, if you are, for example, in a committed relationship, sometimes this can bring you much closer together. So sometimes, and I'm jumping on to like 6 or 7 here, but there's always opportunities in the midst of this. So try the worst case scenario exercise. For most people, what they realize, if they sort of expose themselves to the fear, the anxiety, then what would happen? Then what would happen? They realize that they have a lot less stress than they thought they would, that things wouldn't be as bad as they thought they might be. And many people have already endured this. Many people, for example, in 2009, they lost their house, they lost their job. They had to rebuild. And I know many personal examples of people who had to experience that. And I got to tell you, they're stronger now than they ever were. They learned a lot. If you have a failed business, what we've done in studies on ultra wealthy individuals, they have a tendency to have this internal locus of control. So when they have failure in their life, they look at themselves like, what can I do differently? What can I learn from this? And so there's always an opportunity in that. So let's move on to number 6. And I was sort of jumping ahead here, but this is find the opportunity. One of my favorite mantras in the midst of stress is I ask myself, where's the opportunity? Where's the opportunity? I would encourage you to write that down. Maybe put it as an alert on your phone if you're going through a stressful period of time, and have this pop up every couple hours on your phone, or read it as a sticky note on your mirror or at your computer, at your terminal. Where's the opportunity? What an incredible mindset. Because if you start paying attention and asking yourself, where's the opportunity, you're going to find some opportunities. So, for example, I'm sure you have an experience of COVID and the lockdown, that kind of thing. I started to ask myself, where's the opportunity? So, for example, I have 2 young kids. Schools are shut down, which, by the way, is a terrifying experience if you're a parent, and you have to work and you have to make money to, pay the rent. How am I going to take care of my kids? How am I going to educate them? How am I going to be, that stay-home instructor? How am I going to homeschool our kids when we both work? So obviously very, very stressful. but where's the opportunity? And one of the things I arrived at is, well, there truly is an opportunity here for me to spend more time with my children. And what kind of father do I want to be? Looking back on this, what kind of person do I want to have been during this period of stress? Where can I look to develop myself? What more skills can I learn? What approach to business might I need to learn? Is this an opportunity for you to start that side hustle you were always thinking about? What about your relationship? What's the opportunity in the middle of this stress to better your relationship? Maybe have some conversations that you hadn't talked about money before or investing before. Where's your opportunity as a parent, as a grandparent? Regardless of the stress you're going through, whether it's financial, whether it's not, where's the opportunity is one of my favorite mindsets. And I'm not just saying this, I use this all the time, because just like you, I will get stuck in a narrow frame of reference. I will get stuck focused on my anxiety, my concern about the future. What am I going to do right now? This is a normal response to being a human being. And if you can broaden that frame of reference and almost like you're looking at the problem here, and if you can just sort of look up, where's the opportunity? And if you ask yourself that question, you're going to find opportunities all around you, opportunities to have better relationships with your children, opportunities to have a better relationship with your partner or your spouse, opportunities to allow you to develop your skill set, your knowledge base, your understanding of a better approach to building the life you want to live. Where are the job opportunities, et cetera? And, a lot of really good investors are always looking for opportunities. And many of them, like Warren Buffett, he seems to get sort of excited about market downturns, right? So he's seeing an opportunity while everyone else is panicking and fleeing. And sometimes when we watch him hold, like people get upset at him, right? I bet you he's a little bit excited. I bet you he's got some money on the side looking for the opportunity, right? Where's the opportunity? Let's move on to number 7. So we're going through 7 tips to navigate a financial crisis without ruining yourself. It's timely, if you don't mind me saying, because of what's happening in the stock market and people are freaking out. It's a very normal experience. Tip number 7, the future self exercise. And again, this is another fun one. And what you're going to notice is a lot of these really do try to get us to be more future oriented, to be thinking towards the future. If you're fully focused on the present, you're going to do worse when it comes to investing and worse when it comes to your financial life. Just plain and simple. This is somewhat controversial, but I'll say it. There's some really interesting studies that have come out around meditation. And don't be upset at me because I love meditation. But what the studies have found is that people who spend more time meditating, focusing on the present, not worrying about the future, guess what? They don't do as well financially. They actually make worse investing decisions. Okay. They actually plan less for the future. It only makes sense, right? They're very present focused. So one of the things we need to do to make sure that we're not making mistakes, not ruining ourselves financially, is having a future orientation. And so that's where this future self exercise comes in. So this is going to pass. This market turbulence is going to pass. This period of a down period, this period of scarcity, of fear, it's going to pass. It's going to pass. This is just what we know to be true. Okay. Markets go up, they go down. This is what's happened through the beginning of time, right? And it will continue to happen, by the way. You will get through this. Okay. This is going to pass. You're going to get through it. Now, picture yourself 5 years from now, looking back on today, this week, this month, this year. How do you wish you would have handled it? How would you want people to talk about you? And for me, I would want people to say, oh my goodness, the market was crashing. And you know what Dr. Brad did? He did his first live on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on YouTube. He went live to try to help people and try to calm people's anxiety and give them some psychological tools so that they didn't make the absolute worst mistake at the absolute worst time when it came to investing. And so that's how I'd want people to look at me. I'd want people to look at me and my kids and grandkids during COVID. A lot of marriages really struggled and failed. And you know what? Brad, in his marriage, it was stressful. But you know what he did? He worked on it. He took the opportunity to love his wife and get closer. He took the opportunity to get closer with his kids. So we all have this opportunity, by the way. Excuse me. In moments of stress, we can't control what's happening on the outside. We can't control what's happening in the market. We can't control what's happening in our portfolio. Even if you're diversified, like there's certain asset classes that are going to go down. There's so much we can't control. But the only thing we can control is our response to what's happening, to our behaviors, to our attitude. And so these steps are really built to help you expand your frame of reference, to help you avoid catastrophic thinking, for you to picture your future self and how you want to look back on yourself, run yourself through the worst case scenario, thinking through this, and definitely put some time between your impulse to act when it comes to the market and pulling the trigger. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here with me on this first live I've ever done. I do it a lot on TikTok, my first doing it on the other platforms. I plan on doing several of these in the next couple of weeks. I've got a new book coming out that I'm anxious to promote and get out there. It's The Psychology of Financial Planning. I'd obviously highly recommend it if you're a financial planner and you work with clients. But I thank you for being here with me, and I look forward to seeing you the next time.